All right, everybody, we are here on Surviving Late Stage Capitalism Live. We have with us Robert Patton-Spruill, our resident libertarian. He's here to discuss hierarchy, authority, authoritarianism, all those things. So, without further ado, would you like to jump off with what you would define hierarchy with?
Well, I mean, excuse me, we have different forms of it. So we have our hierarchies in our workplaces. There's hierarchies within our government structures. There's hierarchies within our family lives and where we live in. There's different hierarchies everywhere we go. But in general, a hierarchy is there's a chain of command, or there's a series of decisions that are withheld to people within higher levels of said hierarchy. So, where do we need the hierarchies? Where does it work? Where does it doesn't work? Where does the extent of it? Yes, I'm a libertarian. I'm a capitalist. And I argue that they're necessary, but they should be limited in as many forms as possible, is my general feeling on it. In my household, I'm pretty absolute. My household, I believe that to be successful in late stage capitalism, you have to run your household like Castro's Cuba as a dictatorship. To actually make it in our capitalist world, you have to live like a socialist, but I don't believe the socialism works on the other side. Once you scale it up past like 30 individuals, I think it sort of falls apart. So, but anyway, back to hierarchy. Yeah, I mean, we need them and we don't. Or where do we need them? That's the question. So I throw it to you.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to explore here today, because the way I've always tried to explain that some of them are needed to people, especially people that are very much about dismantling all forms of hierarchy in all situations at all times. I get where they're coming from, and I'm sympathetic to that. But for example, if you have a small child and you're crossing the road, you need to exercise authority. You need to, have that hierarchy where you're in charge of that safety and hold their hand. I think the problem comes when people try to look at broader society the way they run their family. Like, you have clear, delineations as to what works on small scales and what works on large scales. I think a lot of people extrapolate nuclear family patriarchy onto all of society and think that kind of that the stratification that arose in that structure is A, fundamentally natural, and B, fundamentally right. So I think hierarchy for me it's a huge point of contention for me. I don't like hierarchical things because it feels as if you're positioning yourself, if you're in a position where you're above somebody in a hierarchical structure, it feels as if you're exercising control too much often.
Mm-hmm.
Just in my experience. Now, it's anecdotal, but the reaction that people have when they are talked down to or condescended to is, I think it's an understandable one. And I think the resent for people in positions of authority, considering the state of the world, is also pretty understandable. But I do acknowledge that there's a certain amount of, just for the sake of administering a society, everything can't be a simple majority vote. There wouldn't be time. So I think a certain amount of delegation would have to happen at some point. You cede a little bit of that autonomy to someone, establish a justifiable, legitimate hierarchy, and then you can move forward in a way that is both just and productive.
Right. Do you feel that, do you personally bridle against authority? I do. For example,
it depends on the situation. It depends on the circumstances. If I'm at the DMV or some kind of bureaucratic office, they're in a position of authority, and I comply with that because I need to get the thing done.
Hmm.
If I've done nothing wrong, however, and a cop is hassling me, I will assert my rights and hold every step of the line because that's not a necessary exercise of authority. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I, what about at the workplace?
Um,
Like, how do you handle it there?
well, I've been on both ends of that. Um, mostly in the culinary field, and kitchens are extremely authoritarian. You come in, you say yes, chef, yes, chef. You say no, chef. You say thank you, chef. You do the thing you need to do, and as long as there's mutual respect, that holds up.
Right.
Now, if the chef comes in hungover and can't do his part and is barking orders at you, all of it falls apart, and I think that's reasonable.
Mhm. So, but would you like in an actual kitchen shift, your chef falls apart if if they said, or would you attempt to pick up the slack for them
Oh yeah, I'd pick
and
up the slack, but
go to
I'd
that
pick up the
next
slack, but I
level?
wouldn't take any of their orders moving forward from there. I would do what I know needs to be done because clearly they can't handle it.
Mhm. That's interesting. So I spent most of my work career in higher education, and they have strange they have rankings and a hierarchy within the faculty, and I wanted to be like high up in that hierarchy. I for like a probably like the first half of my career as a college professor, like it was a goal and a dream of mine. And then when I realized it probably wasn't ever going to happen for me, I just began to ignore it. Like the hierarchy meant nothing to me. Like, what do you think our world should be? What do you think we should do with these hierarchies that are kind of flawed? And I just mean that, when you look at the rankings in college professors, it's not like it doesn't have like the rhyme or reason comes from like 1600 AD England, right? But how do you approach those situations?
You know, it's like on a broad societal level, I think the best way to approach it, if I could like wave a magic wand,
Yeah.
would be to, rip up the social contract we have, suspend everything like the way it's moving long enough for us to reorganize society in a way where people, A, have more autonomy and B, have less restraints, but more community support. And I think you can accomplish that without an authoritarian structure, which is why I fall into the libertarian socialist end of things. I don't
Mhm.
think you need a stratified top down, one party state to do socialism. I think you can do it on the community level. Those communities send delegates to like regional councils that need to communicate about emergency responses and things like that. So in the big picture, like that's kind of where I'm coming at it from. Within my own life though, like having to reconcile that there's some things that I don't have control of. It's uncomfortable, but it's a thing that you do end up acknowledging. It's a process. Started that process probably a decade ago. I'll probably finish it about 5 days after I die. You know, um,
Yeah.
so
Well, in my other life, I'm a film director, and in that world, that's sort of a creative dictatorship and authoritarian dictatorship, and I don't know how it could work without it. Like the role of making movies, film directing. I'm not even
right,
saying super large crews. I'm talking like anywhere from 10 to 30 people. Like without a hierarchy, a first assistant director, a second assistant director, your best boy grip, all the different levels within it. I don't see how it can work. And so then I say to myself, well, although I bridle against authority, I'm with you 100%. I don't see how our society can really actually truly work without a form or at least some governmental authoritarianism. Like I wonder, how do you feel about it? you're a
Easily, I would
front
say
row
that
soldier.
directing a film is one, maybe two or three people's vision, right? The screenwriter, the director, maybe a producer. Those are the people with the organizing concept, right?
Mhm.
That's like, Marx, Lenin, Trotsky.
Hmm.
Okay. That film is different than a society. A society is everyone's vision having to compete and coexist, right?
Hmm.
So, is it right and is it practical to have one or a small group of people dictating the vision of a society that belongs to us all?
Okay, but so that's a that's actually very heavy. You bring up some by calling the names Marx, Trotsky. I mean, that's a giant.
Marx is the executive producer, Lenin's the director, Trotsky is the screenwriter.
Right, but who's holding the fist in that? Well, I guess it was Lenin for a brief period of time.
I think Stalin would be the dramatic lead. Um,
Right. And then that
yeah, wasn't a very good movie by that point.
and then that brings in the whole point that eventually Stalin either puts an ice pick through their head or is the last survivor and runs that shit to his death. Where then
Right.
authoritarianism takes on whole new levels of psychosis. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's natural to go a little crazy when you have that much riding on. Like, I'm not making excuses for the man or justifying it or and apologia or anything. So please don't read this as that.
no, I'm not.
But I can't imagine myself maintaining stability if I had seized control and assumed authority over an entire nation of people. Like, that's so many individuals' harm that you are ultimately responsible for if it comes to them, that the weight of that needs to be distributed as far and as wide as possible, from my perspective.
Right. Right. And if we look at all the previous government forms of it, like the only one that, in my opinion, that semi works is our own because our authoritarians are only in power for a maximum of 8 years. And I think that changes the dynamic of our society compared to, other ones that came before us and even, the ones that exist today. What are your thoughts?
Just for like a nomenclature purpose, when you say our authoritarian, you're referring to the executive branch, yes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I'm,
All right.
I'm referring to
I
the
wouldn't call them true authoritarians because, like, there are checks on them. Like, when those checks are exercised properly, those
well,
exist. We have one right now, but in general, it's not supposed to be that way. Um, I would point you to Rojava. I would point you to the Zapatistas in Chiapas. Um, like, there have been like numerous attempts. The Spanish attempted like a form of like decentralized socialism. They ended up having like outside pressure and internal conflict that made it not work. But it can be done. I think there is an issue with scaling it. I think that's reasonable to point out and acknowledge. But a lot of that issue with scaling it comes from you want to talk about authoritarianism, the CIA exercising their authority over who gets to have self determination.
mm,
Like the discourse about like socialism only works this way and it turns into bad. Well, those are the only ones that made it because they were under constant threat of coups. Maybe if we weren't funneling, money and guns and various narcotics in and out of the global south in support of like right wing, militias, they could have developed a different structure that didn't have to be so paranoid.
mm.
Um,
Well, I mean,
yeah,
I would almost say that. I mean, I know government workers, and they ain't really good at much. So I don't. So I almost automatically
I grew up. My grandfather worked for the Forest Service for 52 years. He's not great at anything that isn't like the farm he grew up on or knowing shit about forest management, but he does that very well. At
right.
least used to. He's currently got Alzheimer's.
Yeah, of course.
Um,
I mean, look, there's there's specialized niches within government. I'm sure, quote unquote, foreign intelligence requires a certain niche, but I generally find that government workers ain't the greatest at it. And I would just say that the idea that we would credit ourselves with having our CIA has so much power that it can derail an entire multi-million population's government, it seems a little strong to me. And I would say that this, let me just
I'm
say,
going to push back on that just because,
well,
like, I
I'll
just
let
have
you,
read a bunch on the
let,
CIA, and they
let
definitely,
me finish.
like, they know where to put their thumb on the scale and for the greatest effect. Um,
Look, it's their job to practice that shit. I'm not denying it. And that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that it just seems like an excuse because I think the actual underlying uh, thing was a failure. And I want to ask you, obviously take your time to rebut the previous statement, but
sure.
I want to ask you, like, I feel like the Republic of the United States of America is socialist now. It already is. Like, we already live in a socialist, semi-communist paradise.
We have socialized the gains for people like you that have means, and we have, like, or no, we've privatized the gains. Sorry, I got that backwards. We've privatized the gains that go to you. What society has assumed on your behalf is all of the effects of that. The effects of deregulation, all of the cleanups, taxpayers foot the bill, right? The excess deaths, the excess mortality, the strain that has on individuals and the economy, the fact that the privatized market is very resistant to moving away from fossil fuels. That's going to be a public expense when we have to pick up the pieces from climate disasters. Like, I don't see any way you can, in good faith, unless you genuinely believe that socialism is just the government doing things, which is not the case, that we have any form of socialism here. We used to have a form of social democracy, which is adjacent to some, like, democratic socialism, right? New Deal stuff, like, social programs exist. I'll give you that. They are socialized, but socialism is about the relationship between worker and means of production, right? So the ownership of it is not societal, and therefore it is fundamentally not socialistic. If we nationalize all the natural resources and all the utilities were suddenly administered by local communities, you'd have an argument. But that's just not what we're living in.
Well, let me try to address or ask two other questions. So the first one is, you said that it was socialism for the rich.
Essentially, the costs of accruing such wealth, the negative effects and the financial burden of that going to a small group of people, and the blowback that deregulation and predatory practices have on the economy, that cost is borne by the population as a whole.
Okay, so let me just, there's a lot in there. I apologize.
No, go for it.
But 90% of the taxes are paid by 20% of the people. So the same people that have the money are the ones that are paying for it. I don't see how you can qualify.
Right, but those taxes aren't intended to go to clean up their messes. Those taxes are meant for the public welfare.
Right, and sometimes a mess that has been created is for the public welfare. So I'll just give the example of Spirit Airlines closing. They went into full bankruptcy. There was a push to get the government to underwrite them for a period of time for a reason that was for the public good. Now, some people said that that was socialism for the wealthy, was some people's reaction to that push with the Trump administration, and eventually it fell apart. But the idea was that there are 35,000 employees of this company, and we don't want it to just poof and disappear, and that there's a lot of other people that, there's all the companies that provide them, the maintenance on the airplanes and all the other stuff, which added up to another, I believe it was something like 90,000 more people. And so you can argue and say that, oh, the government was being socialist to save a business, but at the same time, they're actually looking at it and say, okay, if we have 120,000 people on unemployment, like, where's the greater good? And so when a government intervenes with a private business in that way, it isn't looking at it from the perspective of I'm helping the owners in this of this business. They are, and they are helping the stockholders. But in theory, the main interest would be the employees when they're very large companies. Generally, the government pays attention when a company has like 20,000 employees or above. Then it becomes a public good issue. So where do you stand on that?
I would say if the government had bought Spirit outright and it became publicly owned, that you could point to as like a fleck of socialism, right? Because the means by which you can produce air travel are now at least a public option, right?
Right.
You're getting closer to it.
All right.
But just a bailout is like neoliberal House of Cards games. You
Well,
know, like in the during the housing bubble burst in '07 and '08, when all those banks got bailed out, like they could zig or zag. You could bail out the homeowners and let them keep their homes, and you'd have people with property who then immediately pay the banks. Everybody's made whole. Or you can bail out the banks and let them seize the assets that they, sold to people that weren't qualified to get them in the first place had the regulations been enforced properly. So, like, I don't think either of those is truly socialism, but it speaks to the priorities of people in positions of power within, like, the neoliberal consensus, i.e., economics in America from Reagan forward. Like, there's pretty much an agreement that we're going to do like this, laissez-faire capitalism until the businesses need help, and then we'll intervene. But we don't intervene on behalf of the people.
yeah, but I mean, you got a progressive tax rate. So you got that in place. The companies that you're talking about are owned by the public, which means
No, they're owned
yeah,
by individuals that are
yeah,
members of the public, but they are not publicly owned.
right. But it's owned by the public, the people.
But what percentage of the public, though? Like really?
I would say that anyone that has a 401k or has an IRA plan, which I would probably guess is a ginormous percentage of the public.
It's about 10 to 15%. Last I checked.
You think?
I think like of people that have a 401k that is substantial enough to like really factor into anything. I mean, you just said that
Well, if you
the
have the
10% of people pay 90% of the taxes.
well, 20%,
So
but yeah.
like if they have stocks, it's a small amount. Like it's a little bit here and there. They're not sitting on a board. They're not making decisions. They don't have influence or agency. Like they've got a coupon that they can cash in that shifts in value from time to time. Right?
I think you're I think you're looking at it from a perspective of a person that hasn't had a chance to do it. I'm going to give you an example.
It's not the case.
Well, no,
Not the case at all.
well, let me tell you my example. And I do real estate as one of my wealth generating things, which includes landlording, fixing buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm in the Home Depot, and I believe this was like 2001, 2002. And I see a commotion going on over where the managers are doing their manager shit. And then half of them take their little orange aprons off, put them down, walk right out the building. I'm like, and then they get on the loudspeaker and they say, "Hey, today we're short some staff. It's going to be problematic. If anyone wants to, shop tomorrow or the next day, we'll have our shit together better," something like that. So I asked my rep, I'm like, "Hey, what just happened?" And he said, "Oh, Home Depot stock just split. And those guys have been here and have so much stock that they just retired and quit right now because their participation in the company's stock buying program made them millionaires."
Okay. And those were managers, right?
Well, you got to start somewhere, don't you?
No, my point is that the access is gate kept, that it's not available to the average person as a default, and therefore, like, it's not like it's A, not socialism
But
just
if
on
you
the face of it.
but if you work
B,
at
it's not
Walmart,
the egalitarian thing you're pretending that it is. And I feel like you're smart enough to get that.
well, no, I mean, maybe I'm an idiot here, but if you work at Walmart or Home Depot or any of the large corporations, from the moment you're a full-time employee, you have access to the stock buying program, which is the same thing that, not saying you, but other folks will be like, oh my God, the company bought back its stock. Why does it buy back its stock? It sells it back to its employees at a discount. Like, for
Some of them
example,
do. Yeah.
most do. Most of the big ones do. And it's like, I don't understand what we're saying. It's like, here's an opportunity for you to own the means of production, own your own job at a discount, but you just have to
Okay.
sacrifice to do it. And then you're telling me that's not
It's
socialism.
not
I'm like,
viable.
that's
But it's not
totally,
viable. Do you know how many Walmart employees have to be on like Medicaid and food stamps because they already can't meet the needs for like basic living? How are they supposed to find extra money to invest in stocks if they're already worried about putting food in their kids' mouths?
do you want to address that particular issue? The
Then no,
Walmart
like I'd
employees?
like an answer to that direct question. How is it available to them if they can't even afford to feed themselves?
Look, there's a percentage of our population that really can't work. And
No, these are people with jobs.
well, I know because the company's giving them a job to stand there and say, "Hi, welcome to Walmart." It's
No,
not. They're not
stockers,
doing. They're not.
cashiers, any number of employees, their wages are not sufficient. You're a landlord, you know how much rent costs,
Mhm.
right? Okay. So when you're generating wealth, it's extracting it from someone else. That
Yeah.
limits how much, yes, it does. And
But
it
do they need a
limits the
place?
amount that they
But
can
do
be
they
able to
need a
put
place
food
to
on the
live?
table and put
No, no.
medicine in their.
Ask the question. What do they get for the money that they give the landlord?
I should hope a frequently maintained place to live
Right.
that is safe and not like a fire hazard.
Right. Where's the extraction?
The extraction is when rent goes up, but no improvements have been done, or like maintenance is slow or non-responsive,
What if rent
or
goes up?
you own
What if
something in a
rent goes
different
up to
state.
pay? What if rent goes up to pay the taxes which fund the police, the firemen, and the teachers?
Those taxes are
So
on the
you shouldn't
property
have to pay
owner,
for
not
that.
the renter.
What's that? You shouldn't. The renter shouldn't have to give their rent to the landlord so that the taxes can be paid so that we have society.
No, because that's your property. It's a property tax. Why? It's not a renter's
And
tax. It's a property
what
tax.
happens? Okay, so if I'm a landlord, my business is to rent out property, and one of my expenses is oil, another one of my expenses is heat, and another one is insurance, and another one's property taxes. So I take the gross amount of money that I collect from my customers and I pay those expenses first. One of those major expenses is the price of your entire society. And so I have to take the money from you so that we have a society, so that we have firemen,
No, you
we have
choose
light.
to. You choose
No, I
to.
don't. If I
It's a
don't,
conscious choice.
no, if I
You
don't,
could take a little
listen,
bit less profit and maybe raise it less, split the
but, but,
difference.
but what
Like
if the
that's a choice, man.
what if the reason is because the taxes go up, so everyone's costs go up as well? And then what is
It's
it a
not
reasonable?
like it's not, the burden should not be on the renter who doesn't own the property when the tax is on the property.
But the renter lives in the property and has the benefit of having a nice, safe home place to live.
Right, but they can't, that's not their asset. They can't
So
leverage it to
what?
make more money like you
So they
can.
should buy their own.
How are they to do that when half their money's going to rent and the other half is supposed to be buying stock in Walmart?
You have to figure that out. You have to work really hard to be successful in the world that we live in. It's not easy.
Is
There's
it that you
nothing,
have to work hard, or is it that you have to find a gap in information or a gap in maybe knowledge and then leverage that in such a way that you can put a price on something that people are willing to pay because they don't know the reality of it?
I mean, we're talking about the most simplest thing of housing, particularly right now. It's something that everybody needs. So you have to
Exactly.
figure out a way to pay for it. and to figure out a way to have it. And then our society here in the United States is that it's not your income taxes that pay the civilization. It's your land taxes pay your civilization. So the federal government don't pay for your firemen, your policemen, your teachers, your road crews, any of that.
There are no block grants. There are no federal grants or state grants.
There are some, of course, there are some, but the actual core of your society is paid for by land taxes. That is an expense that if you're going to live on the land, whether you own it, rent it, or whatever, that you have to share in that burden, because that's the socialist society we live in. And it's my job as landlord, sheriff of Nottingham, is to collect the money and hand it over to the government so that you can have a hospital and all the other stuff.
All right. So you said two different things there about the same dynamic. Mm-hmm. In one breath, you say, I'm being taxed more and I have no choice but to charge you more to cover those taxes. In the other breath, you say it's a shared expense. We should share this burden. Well, which is it?
Well, I mean, here it is. There's a contract between the landlord and the tenant. The landlord has a bunch of expenses to pay for as part of that contract. So they have to pay, as you said, for maintenance, potentially heat, potentially water, a whole bunch of stuff, right? And we would say it's a significant burden, right? So you don't have to worry about it. So your landlord does, though. They're the ones that have to worry about whether the roof is done, the heater's been cleaned, whether all that stuff, all the basics of life. That's a service that's being provided to you. Now, the choice is, one of the expenses is I have to pay for society. That is one of the things that has to be paid for. Otherwise, I have no operating business, because they'll come and they'll take it. They have the authority and the power to take it if you do not pay them. So there's no choice there
for the
landlord. So their only choices is to say, okay, what is my profit margin based on my debts, my maintenance, my schedules, et cetera, et cetera. There's the only choice that they have, if they have that choice at all. And I've seen numerous times where landlords don't have a choice about it. All it takes is a tax increase, an insurance increase in price, a price in energy. Like back in the day, we used to rent apartments with heat included. And we didn't know how much oil was going to be that winter, but we had to make an agreement that would cover it and give us enough. And many times you don't make it, and you're subsidizing your tenants to live there. So you have to think about it and say, all right, well, this is the situation. We all have to pay for our society. And that's why I say we all. And that's just the way it is. We all do.
All right. So I'm listening to this. I'm taking it in. I acknowledge that there's work, that there is responsibility, that there's, there are things that are done that do provide value.
Right.
Okay. I'm not saying like you do nothing.
We're not talking about shitty landlords, right? We're not talking. Look, we know that there's good.
No, I'm talking about successful landlords like yourself.
Right. We're just talking about people that understand the deal. I'm supposed to provide you a house without roaches and mice and make sure the garbage is picked up. I'm taking care of you. I am.
Okay. So if the burden is so onerous that even with passing off the property tax expense to the renters, that you're in such a precarious situation, and yet you still manage to amass over $1 billion. How does that happen? Because it can't be this shoestring budget thing that has no profitability to it, and it's so tenuous, and also generate $1 billion. Like, that doesn't make sense.
No, there are two types. I mean, there's the smaller mom and pop landlords, and this might sound ridiculous, but that's people that own like families that own like 200 apartments or whatever and less. And then there's another scale of it, which are the mid-range guys, which, own between 500 and 1,000 units. And then there's the billionaire banking corporations that own units in the tens of thousands range. So those are here in the United States, what we have when we're talking about land use, housing.
And all of them generate a profit reliably because they have something people can't go without. And
I would say not all of them.
and they continue to generate a profit and they continue to drive prices up. And yes, a lot of that is driven by like the bigger fish like BlackRock buying up single family dwellings and things like that. So there is some pressure from bigger fish on y'all.
Well,
But
like
with
the
all of those
mid-range.
constraints and expenses, how did you generate that much money,
Well, let me first go back.
even though you were
Well,
shifting
we
the
can talk.
property tax burden up?
Well, let me just first say that it's not all, milk and honey. There's the class of landlords around 1,000, 1,500 apartments. They're screwed right now, and they're going bust left and right in that mid range area. And even some of the smaller mom and pops, like if you, let's say you just got into it in 2021, you're probably under intense stress right now just because of the timing of when you entered the market.
Yeah, a massive housing bubble.
I mean, you head into a time like in commercial real estate, it's different from normal residential real estate. When you get a mortgage, your mortgage is only for 5 years, and then there's a rate set change. So you end up with 5-year renewable mortgages where the bank gets to decide whether they're going to renew based on the current situation, and then they can accelerate your debt. So if they see that you're losing money, they may choose to accelerate your debt and demand that they get paid back in full. So it's a wee bit different. I'm sorry, I got a delivery. I just don't know if he needs my signature. I apologize.
Okay, man. You need to sign for something, that's fine.
It's Guitar Center, man. Guitar Center B.
What'd you get?
I don't know. I'm trying to set up a recording studio and a studio for this podcasting stuff. So when you and me hang out, I look extra cool. But
In a studio mog me, gotcha.
But back to me. What was your question about me and my personal?
My question is you specifically, you.
Mm-hmm.
If it puts you in such a tough spot, the property taxes and all of the expenses, like if it's such a burden and it's such a shoestring budget, how do you accrue that money? Not in the abstract, but how did you personally do that?
Well, for me,
like my thinking is that it's not that onerous, that it feels that onerous, and because it's a lot of different constraints on you, but you're also in a position of authority over whether or not people have a place to sleep. So I feel like it makes sense to have to shoulder some responsibility to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that you brought back authority and hierarchy, because that's kind of sort of what it is a little bit. There's a couple things, and one of them is you win some, you lose some. Not everything works. Like I've had buildings that have totally gone tits up, and I've had buildings that are like, wow, this thing's amazing. So it's not all, there's no like full, guarantee of success in the real estate world. And I would say most landlords at least the ones I know that are colleagues of mine, were very risk averse. Like we're scared shitless of getting a building with terrible tenants in it, that we can't get out because the legal system makes it impossible for us to evict folks that don't pay and tear up the place and stuff like that. Those are like the fears of it. So then on the authoritarian level, to be good at it and to prevent going into the red on a property, you have to be very on the nose and on the books. If the rent is late, you send out a letter that says, I'm about to be evil and mean to you and take away your housing. You have to have, you can't be nice to be good to do it well, because once and this has happened to me personally, and I'm talking about my experience, when you say to somebody, oh yeah, you're going to be 2 weeks late. Okay, that's fine. Just let me know. They tell everybody in the building. And the next thing you know, if everybody's 2 weeks late, now you're calling the bank saying, I'm slow in collections, and then you're in trouble, and then you haven't paid your taxes, and then stuff can turn into a snowball of disaster very quickly. So that's and that's hierarchy and authority. And you don't have a multi-tool in your pack. All you have is a hammer. And that's the only tool you have, which is, I will make you homeless in 3 months if you don't pay me today. You don't have like, compassion doesn't work. Being like, oh, I understand you lost your job. Doesn't work. You have to say, well, you need to figure this out because your only tool is a hammer. There's no other. You can't say, well, I'm not going to pick up your garbage. You can't say, oh, well, I guess I'm not going to pay for your heat. You can't do all the things like that. So you don't have any other tool. There's no other option for you. Even if you want to be nice, there's just no other option. Ask me personally, like whatever question. Ask the look.
I'm curious what that does to like a person's like sense of self and like your well-being, because like being like that hard line against like human beings and that has to like hurt at some level,
But the good thing about our society is it's probably only 5 or 10% of the people that you have to be that way to. 90% of them, if you do your job right, are really thankful. 90% of them actually will say, I have a good landlord. My landlord makes sure that, things get fixed and stuff. And there's only 10% who are like, fuck you. I got drunk this weekend. I went to the casino. I don't have the rent and I don't care. And I've left my trash in the front hall. Luckily it's only a small
specific example. I'm sure you're picturing one guy right now.
Oh, I'm picturing dozens. Look, dude, I was a landlord from age 25 to 52. And I'm still in the real estate business, but my business now is hospitality, which I prefer for 1,000 different reasons. I prefer
to be more hospitable.
Yeah, I'm a host, and I'm not a landlord. I'm a host, and it pays more. It's just like the game Monopoly, which, how does it
so like Airbnbs and short-term rentals and stuff like that?
Yeah, I specialize in lake houses and nature retreats. And that's
okay. That's not exactly driving up like in-town housing where it's near jobs.
No.
But like the short-term rental market really in tandem with the buying up of single-family home properties by like a bunch of like umbrella corporations, that like drives up the price of housing stock because they'll come in and pay cash on the barrel instead of like letting a couple of kids just out of college like put some money together and get a loan, right?
Well,
and then that drives up what you're allowed to, based on market forces, charge for rent. And that makes it harder for people to meet those bills, right?
Well, Airbnb and short-term rental has no effect on the housing market.
It has an effect on whether or not homeless people have a space to be. Like there's empty housing stock and people on the street. Like the incongruity there.
But the reason there's people on the street has nothing to do with those things don't work together.
No, rent being through the roof has nothing to do with people being on the street.
Well, most people that are on the street have mental illness issues because that's just not the issue. Most people will work it out and find a way, but they're usually on the street because they can't even stay at their brother or sister's house because their mental illness issues are too harsh and they can't.
No, as far as I know, from what I've read, usually they lose a job, they get laid off, they can't make ends meet, they get evicted by a gentleman like yourself, then they're living in their car. Their hygiene degrades because they don't have access to running water, so it's hard to get another job. Then when you have an eviction on your record, it's hard to get someone to rent to you because they're so risk averse. Reasonably so. But that doesn't help the actual people that are being harmed by that system of housing.
I fundamentally disagree because I owned a commercial building that I leased to a homeless shelter. That it was called 100 Nights. It managed 40 beds or something like that. I know exactly who the people were because some of them I sent there as a landlord. And I also know that the people that are living in the tent camps and stuff around me in semi-rural New Hampshire, it's mental illness. It isn't anything else. It has nothing to do with it because they're part of.
Does the mental illness come first?
Ooh, that's a good one. Does the mental illness?
Or does the stress of having no support cause the mental illness? Because your sample size is what, maybe 80 people tops? 120 people tops.
How do you mean?
40 beds plus however many's in your tent city.
Oh, dude, no, 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 no. This is a city of 40,000 people and 80,000 people in the county. The homeless shelter I supported, we helped something like 6,000 or 1,000 people a winter. Our thing was we were 100 nights because 100 nights is the climate here in New Hampshire where it's under freezing, and so the nonprofit was named to be like, look, we're going to provide housing for 100 nights a year to make sure that no one dies in the woods, kind of thing, was our theory on it, or at least the theory of the organization that I supported. But no, I have a very large sample size. No, I'm pretty sure on
And
that.
each and every one of those cases, and
No, I don't know
the mental health always precluded the homelessness.
I mean, it's a very high percentage, 85, probably 85%, maybe 90. I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of people are too stubborn. A lot of people be like, I'd rather be homeless than listen to my mom yell at me and sleep on her couch. I mean, seriously, there's a lot of people who would rather die than go home and ask their dad for anything, for example, to rely
Maybe
on
a lot of people that are in that position.
Hmm?
But I don't think there's data to support that it's solely individual failure that causes homelessness en masse.
Well, why isn't there data on it?
It's a hard population to study. They move from place to place. Also, there's a lack of caring about it, so the studies aren't done.
Well, maybe so, but I would also say that the studies that are done to find conclusions for hypotheses that say things like, well, it's the price of rent that's causing homelessness. No, the price of rent causes gentrification and people to move. It does not cause homelessness. It causes a man like
if your rent gets jacked up and you can't pay it and you end up without a house, that's the price of rent causing homelessness.
And most people don't do that. They go and move somewhere else where they can afford to be. That's what actually.
Right, but most people aren't homeless. The people to whom it does happen, it did happen to.
Well, why did they? So my argument for you is
okay.
The reason why they're homeless and have ended up on the street is because there's an underlying mental illness or a problem within who they are as an individual.
Right. I understand that. I understand where you're coming from. I just think that is incorrect and not supported by data.
But you just told me that there is no reliable data.
No, I said that enough studies haven't been done. I didn't say there was a lack of reliable data.
Well, I'm saying it's unreliable. I'm saying the data we have now is unreliable. That is my
okay.
My
is the data that's very convenient when it doesn't support your blaming what is essentially the victim of an inherently violent system. Like,
well, let me
leaving a person out in the elements, regardless of any personal failure, is a failure of society.
Let me ask you a question. So you brought up violence.
Yes, structural violence.
Have you ever, or do you live in a multi-unit apartment building? Have you ever?
I have. I had a studio apartment. It was cut out of an old Victorian. I loved that place. It was slightly bigger than my body, and the rent was $700 a month.
All right. Now, how many people also had units in that building?
There were 18 units total.
Wow.
Some of them didn't have bathrooms. They all had kitchenettes.
All right. So let's just say one person slipped into mental crisis and started leaving their trash in front of your door, and you had a shared bathroom and they crapped all over the toilet, didn't clean it up. What would you do?
What I would do is think back to all the times that discussions with libertarians turn to hypotheticals when reality doesn't seem to fit their.
I'll tell you reality. I've had tenants where they fight all day and all night, and everyone calls me and says, "Can you do something about getting rid of these people?"
Okay, well, I wouldn't approach it like that. I would look to the person that's having a crisis and see what help I can provide them. That's how I would respond.
And as a landlord, what do you want to do? You want to help solve the problem. So, of course, you call someone to say, hey, there's this couple, they're having domestic violence issues potentially, et cetera, right? They come, they help, whatever, and it doesn't work. What do you do as the head of the hierarchy of this building? Do you allow one aberrant person to live and ruin the lives of everybody else in that building? Or do
I
you
think
figure out a way
I
to?
think you're putting far too much weight in personal experience and stressors that you've handled. Admittedly, I'll acknowledge that they're real because you're telling me they're real and they happen to you. But I think you're extrapolating that onto too much of the population. Most people with mental illness are more likely to be the victim of a crime than they are to perpetrate a crime.
All right.
That is
Well,
statistically proven. It's about 3 times as likely.
when I also say mental illness, I say I use that for alcoholism, uh,
Yeah, those are mental
opioid
illnesses.
addictions, et cetera, et cetera. I don't. It's
Yeah,
not in my mind. I'm not just saying schizophrenia or anything like that. I'm saying, you know,
substance
I'm,
abuse disorder. Yeah.
there's lots of disorders that I'm broadly using the term when I'm using it. I'm not saying to be like, oh, this is someone with XYZ type of disorder. I'm saying, look, the reality is some people fall apart, dude. And they fall apart. And I've seen it over and over again. And I have a very large sample size because I was both a landlord in a major city, Boston, Massachusetts, and I was a landlord here in Cheshire County, New Hampshire. So I've gotten to see, and I was a landlord in a predominantly African American community, and I've been a landlord in a predominantly white community. And I'm telling you, and I know the data that you seek is right here, and I'm giving it to you because how else would you write it down without asking a person like me what my data showed? And I'm telling you that
Would
out of all,
survey hundreds of people like you and then aggregate that data and look for trends. You wouldn't go on one anecdote.
of course not, but I'm giving you one really solid data point. One. I mean, I'm telling you the truth because I want to see solutions. I'm not talking about it.
All
To,
right. Well,
to,
okay, let's talk solutions then. So
I
what is
want.
the solution then? Because my thought is that it's public housing.
Have you ever lived in public housing?
I haven't, but I've had friends that did, and I crashed there for lengthy periods of time. It was just as fine as moderately kept landlord apartments. Like that's been my experience.
My experience, and I never lived in public housing, but I lived near very large public housing projects, was that it was horrible. That to live in public housing meant you had to walk and pee through the hallways, that the heat didn't work, that the service was terrible. And I
And
believe
you
we
got all this living next to it.
and I believe we as a society tried public housing on a pretty grand scale in the 1950s and 60s, building projects like Orchard Park and Cabrini Green and stuff like that. And we found that the quality was way worse than when we asked the private landlords to take care of public housing through the Section 8 system. We found was more efficient and provided better housing solutions for those that needed it. We've already
Well,
tried.
clearly that's not the case because we have a huge homelessness problem in this country, and it's not been addressed by the market. It's not been addressed by landlords. It's not been addressed by the government. So, like, I think it's worth revisiting social housing.
Wait a second. So you think what's the percentage of people that are homeless in this country?
I don't have the figures right in front of me right now. I didn't know we were going to end up here.
Well, no,
So
I mean you just told me that it was a huge problem, and I'm like,
there's
this
at
isn't a
least,
huge
what is
problem.
it, like
Like
80, 90, bordering on 100,000 in the city of Los Angeles and the greater area around it?
40 million people in California.
So none of those people,
No, it's like
there's such a small amount of them that it's statistically insignificant, so they don't matter.
no, it's not that they don't matter, but that should be handled by charitable organizations and by the families of those individuals
Then why aren't they doing it?
because they're mentally ill and they're too fucking crazy.
So everyone is mentally ill or crazy or a successful landlord or they pay rent.
I'm not going to get into a silo and everyone or
Well, but I mean, you keep going to this well, man. Like it
no,
seems
I'm
like
not going to the well.
that's your thing. Anytime there's like you need an explanation for like a societal ill that you can't account for, it's mental illness. It's a bell curve thing. It's blame the individual instead of look at the nuts and bolts of things and how the system is built and how it forces people through the cracks, not just lets them fall through.
No, no. I mean, look, I think overall we do a pretty excellent job of making sure that our population is housed. I think that you're literally looking at the aberrative number, the tiny, the statistically irrelevant number, and saying we do a terrible job. And I'm like, wait a minute, but we have a statistically irrelevant number, so we don't do a terrible job. If you told me 10% of the population, which is still a small number, is homeless, now you're talking what 42 million people. That's not what's out there. We're
Okay,
not.
let's just say for at what point do you care about them then?
I care about them now. I ran a homeless shelter. I care about them now.
But you're talking about them as if they're statistically insignificant. They're
They are.
only in that position because of a personal failure. There's like
Oh no,
there's
in
a
that
disconnect and a
because of
dispassion
mental
to the
illness.
way that you talk about homeless people that like honestly I'm kind of surprised by.
Look, it's not. I have done more for homeless folks than anyone out there. I've supported and housed homeless veterans in my personal properties. I've done all this stuff. I've literally looked at this and tried to find solutions. And the solution to high rent is deregulation. I can tell you that with 100%, because I would have built 50 or 60 units in the city of Boston myself if the regulations would have allowed me to. I can tell
Right. Just put no guardrails on the thing, let businesses do whatever they want, let them have a free for all with the economy and everything will work out fine. Right?
yeah, you're putting words in my mouth. That's not what I said, but that's a fun way uh, of twisting what I said. What I said is the reason why we have high rent in our cities is because of regulation, because the cost to actually build in that area due to regulation makes it non-profitable.
What specific regulations cause what specific costs to be untenable?
The land use regulation. So, for example, if I wanted to build, if I owned a lot of land in the city of Boston and I wanted to build a 5-unit apartment building on it, but it was only zoned for single family, I am not able to add 5 units. I'm only allowed to build 1 unit.
Okay, that's I don't see that as an issue of regulation. I see that as a zoning issue.
Is it zoning regulation the same word?
I mean, in a sense, they are, but when I hear someone bitch about regulations,
what is a zoning code?
like
It's a regulatory code. That's what a zoning code is.
okay, then maybe you made a mistake in business buying there and should have bought somewhere else. If
Right.
you wanted to build a multifamily unit, why would you buy a single family unit?
Right. So then the problem is because I can't build a multifamily unit there, you are going to pay more rent because no one can add more supply to it. It's that simple.
Right. Well, there's another reason we can't add more supply. Yes. From the social level, there's a federal law against building public housing. It was put in, I think, in the 90s. I can't recall the exact name of the act. It was like 94 or 95. That the existing public housing stock was capped, and so there's no competition with the private market that can accommodate people that can put together the means but can't pay for the inflated rate that a housing bubble creates.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow how the federal law about adding units.
If the government is preventing itself from building more public housing stock, then there is not just a regulatory constraint on businesses. There's also a government like regulating itself out of the market, which I think is a huge mistake.
Well, I disagree. I don't think the government should. I would hate to have the government as my landlord because they're terrible. They're the worst landlords in the world. The government should not be in the housing business. I mean, there's like, where does it work? I mean, there's
You just told
Indiana.
me you'd never lived in public housing, so how can you say that you know they're the worst landlord?
I've
You
smelled
know,
I've smelled the buildings.
that doesn't that
What? I'm from
all
the hood.
all of these things are superficial and judgmental and
But I'm
condescending
one,
to like people that are that
I
you've
am
like
100% from the hood.
positioned beneath you.
I am 100% from the hood. I am the hood. That's where I was born and raised. I was born between Humboldt and Warren Street in
Okay, I'm
Rockford.
not disputing, your
So you're asking me how do I know
genesis.
public housing? It was right there. It wasn't like I had to like, oh, I don't want to drive by it.
Right.
It's like it's
But is
every
that was how many years ago? And
I
we
was
haven't
born in
updated it since then, and we
well,
can't update it since then.
well
So
that's
how does
because
that
we saw how
how is that still a valid criticism of a system that has moved forward in time with the rest of us?
but we tried that system. It failed. So we should try a different system. And so what they're currently or what they said is let's not do that again. Let's find a different way to support housing initiatives. So they have, for example, the FHA, Federal Housing Authority, um, which allows folks to buy and repair houses with only 3% down. Like we already do this stuff. Like we've already said what we did before by just giving people houses and trying to hope that we can take care of them failed. So we have to find new ways to help people become homeowners.
Did
And
they think to examine why it failed? Was it a lack of funding? Did it get gutted by somebody who had an ideological reason or a financial reason to want it to fail so that they wouldn't have competition in a market they're already in? Like, there's more to it than just it failed one time, and so we can't ever do it again. Like, that's baby brained. It really is. Like, just because something fails in one circumstance under one set of conditions doesn't mean it fundamentally can't work ever, right?
well, there are probably many reasons why public housing failed.
Oh, and yes.
Um, there probably are many of them, but my opinion of the primary cause of failure is because you had no eviction process. So there was nowhere else for them to go. So it wasn't like you could be like, well, you can't live here in public housing because that was the bottom at the time.
Right.
And the government protected that. And the government said, we're not going to make this family homeless, even though Bebe's kids had just destroyed the elevator that cost $40,000 to repair.
All right, build them with stairs next time.
I know, but see, what's the point of doing that when there are really good landlords that know how to handle, very difficult tenants? Pay them to do it.
If they know how to handle difficult tenants,
Well, but they
and
do.
yet
So we pay them to do it. That's what we decided as a society. Because
I am just noticing in this that it's definitely in your interest to not have any public housing, right? Because that would limit the amount you could charge for rent. If there's a place you can go that isn't going to evict you if you hit hard times, and they charge, at cost or slightly above at cost so that they can justify it to whoever's on the bill, then that makes it hard to pocket 10 or 15% off the top, right?
I will answer that by telling you about 1995. In 1995, Boston had a vacancy rate of 10%. So back then, we had to work to get tenants. It wasn't like, it wasn't like it is today with these 1% vacancy rates. It was like, holy crap, how am I going to get a new tenant to take this place? So what we reacted to is we made our places nice. And that's how we attracted tenants. So what you'll find is that if you have lots of public housing, that'll be very shitty. And that the private tenants will have very nice places that people will want to live in to pay the rent that makes the balance work between society working and society failing. So,
What's
sure.
the problem with that?
So I
People
have
have homes, and your place is nicer than somebody else's, so you get a nice like feather in your cap, right?
well.
Where's the problem?
The problem is that I have to pay for it twice, and you have to pay for it because to support that public housing is going to require tax dollars that are going to be inefficiently spent. And because everyone can stay there forever or whatever, there's no incentive to keep it nice, keep it clean, et cetera, et cetera.
Tax dollars already are going to bomb Iran. I'd rather have them go to that than that.
I agree. We're not going to, I agree. I'd much rather waste the money on public housing than go kill Iranians and ruin the world economy. I'm not,
right.
We're
right.
That's not an issue between you and me, Holmes. The issue in
no, none of this is personal. I just
of course not. We're just debating two different positions. It's fine.
Right. And but I think it's worth identifying what those positions are.
Right.
And one position, mine, is that it is, even if it's inefficient, and even if it puts costs on the private sector, it is more valuable to society to make sure that individuals are cared for and have somewhere to be than it is to let the market decide. Because the market fails people all the time on a daily basis.
Okay. It's my position that the market would solve the problem and has solved the problem, but we've regulated it out of existence. So, for example, when I was a kid, there was multiple types of housing. So we had rooming houses, which were run by basically little old ladies, and they'd rent out rooms and they'd cook a meal for all the residents in there, and someone could afford to spend whatever it was a week to live in that rooming house. And at the rooming house, there was different levels. You could, if you had a certain amount of money, you could have a private room. If you didn't have enough money, you had to be in bunk beds in a shared room. That's how it used to be. We had fixed that problem. There was no such thing as homelessness. We had also solved the other problem by saying, you know what, we're going to lock up all the crazy people in these horrible state institutions. And that's why when I was a kid, there was no such thing as homelessness. Those are the main reasons for it. The other side of this that I'm going to express is that by regulating your land use policies, by even having a zoning code and having that authority there, what you're doing is you're making the property and the expenses higher and higher and higher. It has nothing to do with anything else. Now, for you,
it does have something to do with other things. You don't want an industrial plant right next to a school. You have to zone that kind of shit, don't you?
When have they built a factory in this country in the last 20 years? Come on, man. I mean, maybe you could say that for a data center, but
okay, that's an even better example. Thank you. A data center. That's why zoning exists. Because some land is
zoning exists
too near the public for certain
Whoa. Zoning is here because of racism. You see that in the 1960s, there was a civil rights movement, and the white folks freaked out. And they said, what? We got to treat these people equally? That is a horrible idea. So what they did is they invented zoning. And so they said that only you people can live over here and only you people can live over here. And this is how we're going to make our stuff nice.
So your primary problem with zoning is that it makes it more expensive for you to charge people rent. But the secondary problem is the racism?
No, I'm explaining that zoning was a reaction to the civil rights movement. That's when we created those laws, and that's where it came from. The primary thing was to keep a factory next to a house. Bullshit. Have you ever been to the Meatpacking District of New York?
I didn't say it was the primary thing. I said it's one of the things that zoning does.
That's just icing on the cake. The idea behind zoning was to create a way to discriminate with folks legally. That's what it was. That's right. Why it existed, and that's why
deciding that someone is mentally ill and so therefore they should be thrown into an institution, and that poor people can't have the dignity of their own space because it doesn't fit your profit motive properly. No, but there's not a discriminatory effect.
We had that part solved. You could go and rent a room or a bunk bed or whatever in a rooming house. It was common.
A bunk bed. When was the last time you roomed with more than one person in a room?
Like for what length of time?
Let's say at least a month.
Well, until I was 24, I had roommates, and I was 22 when I no longer had to share a room with somebody. And then I made it to the point that I had my own room from age 22 to about 25 or 26. And then after that, I was in apartments with my then girlfriend, now wife.
And the only thing I've heard cited that could cause a person to fall off that track or to not be able to meet obligations is some kind of moral failure or some kind of mental illness.
Well, I also
There's like zero acknowledgement that there's like a system that is not set up to like help people keep going. Like that there are no publicly funded, publicly like run and administered means by which people can be lifted back up when they fall.
I'm all for a safety net. I've never heard me say not.
No, but you define the safety net as private charity, and that's not what a safety net is.
No, I'm all
right?
for. I don't mind I stated it before. I'd rather spend my money on a domestic safety net than killing Iranians and all of that. I've already stated that. So
Right.
now,
But all your arguments against public housing kind of like in my mind, from my perspective, they call that into question.
Well, they're the worst people to do it. There's landlords like myself, like maybe when I was in my just starting out in my late 20s as a landlord, if I hadn't been regulated out of it, maybe I would have built an artist village with, 150 square foot units that people could afford to live in because I was passionate about it. I had the energy where I could have probably pulled it off then. But
all right, I feel like we're going in circles here
because the regulation made it illegal, it was impossible for me to do it. I could have bought a lot of land in Roxbury back then, $50,000. I could have put, 5, 10 by or 12 by 20 little houses on it and rented that out for another 300,000 back then. And it would have been great. And it would have been affordable housing that people could have afforded to live in. I could have done that, but the laws wouldn't let me. It was illegal because the regulations are there because that's what government does.
Yes, government does put constraints on businesses to prevent abuses. Now, I'm not saying what you were doing would have been abusive, but it exists for a reason. Yes, there are surely flaws in that system, but to deregulate everything is to take off all the guardrails.
At this point, man, I would just rather see, like, we would not have homelessness or a significant homeless issue if we just had rooming houses again. That would solve.
And if we did, it's just because they're crazy.
Well, no, but even rooming houses, like I have a cousin who runs it's not a rooming house, but it's a rooming house, but it's for people with adults with developmental issues. And
yeah, that's called a group home.
Oh yeah, a group home. Yeah. She runs a group home. And I'm not saying, look, we could have group homes for folks that need group homes, and we could just have regular rooming houses where a person that can function, can hold down a job, who maybe only makes $400 or $500 a week, but their rent is $100 a week, so they're able to bank $300 a week. That gets a meal with their rent again. That's how we used to have it. It wasn't that long ago. It was only 45, 50 years ago. And so to sit here now, the question that I pose to you is, what's acceptable? Because you're alive, you should have your own private 1-bedroom apartment or something? Or why can't you share a room?
I think if you're an adult and you can be asked to go into the military and you are saddled with the responsibility of paying taxes and being a full participant in society, I think our society is capable and owes the members of the society that are part of it, participate in it, and keep it going a certain baseline standard of living. Yes. As just because you're alive, you deserve certain things. Yes.
So where does
dignity being one of them?
So where does non-dignity occur?
Non-dignity occurs when I'll give you an example from my own life. I was in a recovery house. There were 3 of us in an open basement living room area. They turned that into a bedroom because of a lack of regulation so that they could make more money. There were no doors, so I had zero privacy. I could be in any state of undress at any point in time, and the people that lived in the house would and could walk through there to do their laundry because the laundry room was on the other side. There were no doors involved. That's an undignified situation. And yet, everyone was fine with deregulating it to the point that existed.
How much did you have to pay to be there?
I paid $175 a week.
Was that affordable for you?
No. It was pretty much everything I made. Minus bills. Once everything shook out, I could save maybe $50 a month.
Interesting. I mean,
but Walmart will let me buy stock, so that's cool.
It's funny because if you join the military, you live in a non-private environment.
Yeah,
right.
You also are like traumatized for pay.
I'm just asking you. That's not. There's no. If you're a member of the Marine Corps, you don't have dignity, and you don't find dignity from.
I don't think there's a dignity in that work, frankly.
Well, you brought up the military, so that's why I was following up on it.
No, I didn't bring up the military. You
said if you were old enough to join the military, then you deserve a certain level.
Right, but I didn't use it as an example of housing.
So
anyway, man.
So you're saying a private room with a shared bathroom?
No, I'm saying it's like the living room of a basement.
No, I'm asking where what is the bottom level of dignity that
you should be able to close your own door, cook, shit, and sleep on your own.
So a studio apartment.
Precisely.
All right, so that's a step up from where we've been for 10,000 years of human society.
Yeah, look at the GDP growth since then, and I think it'll be justified.
So, and we did that all in 100 years. So
I'm sure we did it in even less.
No, but you're saying do that in 30 years because when I was a kid, we didn't have the luxury of having a private place to shit, cook, or sleep.
Well, it's not then anymore, and I'm sorry that happened, but does that mean it has to happen to everyone?
So you're saying I should pay for you to have it even though I didn't?
No, I'm saying that people who amass so much wealth that they can influence sectors of society owe society something for that benefit. And I think we should allocate those resources towards the benefit of people who will then go and rent out your units rather than foreign policy disasters.
But those people are already paying for it now. They're paying for all your entire civilization. What do you mean? Like 20% of the population are paying 90% of the costs.
Yeah, and do you know about how much wealth that 20% of the population has?
Who cares?
I do.
Is it fair for you to say to me, Rob, be like, listen, you have more than me, so you should pay for me to have it? That's not fair.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you should give me $50,000. What I'm saying is
I've been in the
society created a system that you benefited from, and that society has the right to extract back some of that wealth to keep the society going so that more people can benefit and thrive.
All right. So you're saying...
I'm saying that taxes are just and you should pay more of them, yes.
Are you saying that you're saying progressive taxes are just?
Progressive taxes, wealth taxes, estate taxes, all of them. If we're going to have this kind of a society where taxes are how we pay for things, then yes.
Well, first of all, I disagree. I believe that you can have a dignified life and share a room and share your cooking space and shit in the same place as somebody else does, the way human beings have done it for 50,000 years. I 100% disagree that is not a dignified life. So
I'll give you a shared bathroom in the hall, but
you got to have your own kitchen,
like a kitchenette and a door that you can close so that you can have time to yourself if you're having a bad day.
I mean, honestly,
you're going to begrudge that to somebody because they're poor.
It's total champagne socialist, dude. You're like.
A champagne socialist that wants a studio apartment.
Yeah, exactly.
Not homelessness.
It's like when 50,000 years of human existence, we've been blessed to have a shared room and one toilet for 10 people to use, where this planet, like if you look at...
How many toilets are in your house right now while you're condescending to me about wanting homeless people to have a place to live?
But you're saying this when you know
seriously,
most of the human population has to share a shitter and a place to live, and you're saying because
is that right? We have the means to provide people with better than that. Why don't we? Why don't we use the resources to improve basic standards of living? Why is that morally wrong to you?
I mean, a Westerner, certainly a Westerner in our country has a lifestyle. Even the poorest among us have lifestyles that are unimaginable to kings and queens 250 years ago. Like you're just like you're just not even looking at it.
You can play the relative game all you want, but at the end of the day, what I feel the real answer is that, like, you're laughing at because you can laugh all your way to the bank is because you've got enough. You ain't got to worry about that.
I just think that's a very shallow way of looking at it. I don't think that that's at all accurate.
That's a shallow way to look at it.
I'm just saying, look, I'm here with you, Mr. Late Stage Capitalism, because I want to hear your perspective.
Right.
I want to hear because I want to learn. I'm not here because I want to like laugh and joke. That's not why I'm here. Why I'm here is because I want to get your perspective. I want to analyze it for myself. I want to have a direct knowledge on what my Antifa brothers are thinking and how they're reacting to the world that we're living in. I don't want to be in a conversation with folks where they're like, oh, Antifa's this, that, or the other thing. I want to be able to be like, I know Antifa people, and this is how they think.
You know what Antifa's worried about then? The social safety net isn't feeding the homeless. People in affinity groups and DSA and like different community organizations are having to do that because there's not enough resources because of the criminally low taxes and the lack of allocation of those resources to things that actually matter. You want my perspective? That's my perspective.
Well,
there's not a big enough tax base, and B, it's not allocated right.
Well, that's interesting.
Just as interesting as we can't have public housing because they can't do it, and I profit from it, and so therefore I can do it, right?
No,
the profiting is the proof that I'm doing it right.
If you want to discuss public housing, we can do that. And
I've tried to multiple times, and every time you use a thought-terminating cliche about it being smelly or run down, or it worked one time and it doesn't work. So
you're going to want to live in one of my places. You're not going to want to live there. You're going to want to live at a place that I would build for you. That's where you would want to live. That's where most people would want to live.
Honestly, man, I think if I'm not on the street right now, so I can't speak to people on the street, but I'm pretty sure somebody on the street right now, even if it was a little run down, it's still like 4 walls, a ceiling, and security. I don't have to worry about getting mugged. I don't have to worry about, getting hit by a car or something I don't have to worry about all of the actual physical harms that occur to people that are homeless. I'm sure that's statistically insignificant, but those are actual people who are in actual danger. And I think they deserve somewhere to be.
Yeah, they should. And if they can get along with folks, because we live in something called a society, then that's great. And they probably will make it and they probably will get along. But what you're glossing over is that what is the percentage of those folks that are on the streets that can't get along with anybody and live with anybody because of their behavior? You
don't know that, and I don't have it in front of me, so it's a thought-terminating cliche. Like they're all crazy, and therefore they can't take care of themselves, so we don't have to worry about them either. Like it's dehumanizing.
Well, I've made these people human. I've given them houses. I've given them opportunities because I wanted to see. And I'm telling you what I've.
No, you didn't make them human. They were already human.
So if I didn't provide them with an apartment and food and shelter,
they still would have been human beings.
I didn't help them lead a human existence.
You said you made them human. Those were your words.
All right, dude, you're just getting into, you're trying to like chop up
because everything's either a personal failure or there are too many constraints on me making money. Like those are the two tricks.
Mental illness, a personal failure.
Getting along with people and not being able to get along with people could be categorized that, and that's a trope that you like to trot out as well. All I'm saying is you're not seeing them as full human beings worthy of being part of society because society has sorted them out. Like you assume that because they have mental illness, that's why they're on the street, not that being on the street caused the mental illness or even allow for that possibility.
I
Last time
disagree.
we
I'm
talked, you
telling
said
you,
15% of the population
as a person
was
that
too
provided
dumb to
their
succeed.
housing,
That's some bell
as
curve
a
shit, which has
person
been
that
roundly rejected by actual like understandings of what an IQ test is. All an IQ test does is measure how well you can take an IQ test. So like the way you look at people that have less than you and have had outcomes that are different than yours. Damn it.
what happened? You all right?